We saw the Clean earlier today, who, the Clean, they're kind of like a comet. They sort of come around every few years, but they haven't come around here for quite a long time. So it was nice to see Hamish Kilgore with his brother David and Robert Scott on an Australian stage for, the first time in 20-odd years?
Yeah, 22 years.
22 years. So when were you here last? 89, 88?
89, 90? I think 90, yeah.
This is around the time of Vehicle?
Yeah.
Okay. And so just to right off the bat, did you enjoy yourself tonight?
It was all right.
It was all right?
Yeah. I don't know. We didn't enjoy ourselves that much. We had a bit of a ropey time. But it was still nice to play here and be here.
Is there anything like Golden Plains in New Zealand?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unique.
It is unique. I mean, it's its own little country for a couple of days, and I think the bill is as eclectic and interesting as it's ever been, and we like coming here, so hopefully it will go for many years yet. I just like the fact that it's on a little private farm.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
So it's cool, just like Woodstock, right?
No, but
I couldn't know.
Better.
And for sure, people like myself, the stage sits at the bottom of a hill, which is just fantastic.
And you can hear at this festival.
And you can
hear.
hear.
You can hear.
Yeah, really lovely vibe. Hamish, I'd like to start at the beginning and ask you about when the band started. It was the late 70s, 78 or 79. What was happening or what was not happening at the time that led to the Clean forming?
Well, originally I had actually tried playing drums with Chris Knox, and I realised that his ego was too big. I couldn't deal with being in a band with him.
You jest.
Yeah, I jest. I don't know, it just didn't sort of work out. But my brother David was at art school with a guy, Peter Gutteridge. And it was kind of like, after punk broke, well, we were very affected by it. We used to sort of rapidly consume the NME and sort of keep up with what was going on. And we got inspired all to start making music. And we started playing, I started playing with Peter and David. I was the older sort of brother. And I think we had about 1 or 2 practices before we did our first gig. I was terrified that we were going to be bottled on stage at a hall. And I sort of built this barrier of drums and sort of hid behind it. Nobody threw any bottles. But
was Dunedin a rough town back then?
Potentially, all sorts of weird things could happen, Chris Knox, actually in Christchurch, I remember the Enemy went up for a gig. And they actually were being bottled.
Wow.
But then Chris, just started smashing bottles over his own head, and then they stopped doing it.
That sounds about
great way to do it.
Look, we were going to allude to Chris Knox a bit later, but since you keep bringing him up, you did contribute, or both you and David contributed to Stroke Songs for Chris Knox a little while ago, because Chris had a stroke in 2009. For the layperson out there who's never heard of Chris, why is he important?
Oh, he's just such a character, and he was, I met him before, the punk period, and he was just sort of like, bursting out, personality sort of wise, and sort of like incredibly creative too, he's making films and recording music and everything like that, and he was just inspirational, I guess, to us all. And
he had a comic for a while, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how is he?
Well, he's, I saw him a year ago, and I've just seen him recently, and it was a marked improvement. I felt like he's not speaking much, but his form of communication, I sort of felt like I'd spent time with him and, we interacted.
And he's making music, we hear.
Yeah, he's also making art too. I saw some of his paintings, which are pretty cool.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah.
Because that was a great record, actually. They were just not just in terms of the spirit of the thing, but the music and the way those songs were done was consistently great all the way through it. I was really enjoyed listening to that record.
Cool.
So congratulations.
All right.
How was it starting off playing with your brother? Was that like, for some people that might be a bit of an issue, playing with a sibling?
Well, it's a funny story. We thought, we'll start a band, and we went out and we found a guitar for sale. We went out and bought it, and it was pretty funny. It was an old New Zealand guitar, a Commodore, which was actually a terrible guitar. A friend actually now owns it, and he's sort of fixed it up. But I remember buying the guitar, and we came in a cardboard box, and we threw the cardboard box out the window as we drove away. I don't know, some sort of symbolism with that. Don't know what it means. But we got it home, and it's like I played on it a bit, and David did, and then thought, oh, he's sort of better. He's better than me. So he just, continued with it.
Yeah.
And playing with my brother, we had been, obsessive. And Mum's a singer, piano player, and we just had music all around us all our lives. Right back into the 60s. And
So take us inside the Kilgore living room when records are being played. What are we hearing?
back in the 60s. Like just
60s, 70s, anytime.
Anything.
When you were growing up.
Like she was really into Harry Belafonte and
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of sort of Latin sort of jazz and stuff, and old rock and roll, country.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Real
So
mix.
how did you discover music of your own that resonated with you back then?
I just think hearing everything on the radio. Radio in New Zealand in the late 50s, early 60s was pretty amazing.
You're right, okay.
And it was just everywhere, American, British.
It was a real contrast, and we're just having had Sergio Diaz in here. In Brazil, in the mid-60s, you couldn't go down to whatever records and buy a Beatles record, They would actually listen to the BBC on little shortwave radios, and they'd tape it, and they'd give it to their friends, and that's how they got music.
Amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah. It's fantastic.
A lot of when people talk about the clean, they always talk about it in regards to New Zealand. It's very much an aspect of you as a band and the music you make, and I don't know how you feel about that, but would you say that there's like a Dunedin sound?
Yeah, I guess a Dunedin sound. There probably is, I guess, a sort of sound. There's something about the place. It's kind of a raw place, kind of elemental. Weather changes quickly, and it's got sort of the old. It's an old gold mining town. It's got a bit of sort of faded grandeur, sort of emptiness, spookiness to it. And I don't know. It had the first university, so a lot of poets and writers and artistic people sort of moved through that town at some point.
Yeah.
So it has that to it too.
And has it still got it?
Yeah, it does.
That's nice.
Yeah.
And
It's like a really pleasant place to be. It's sort of just about the right size.
Mhm.
It's got just enough of everything to make it, good.
And you've spent your whole life there?
No, I haven't. I've actually only lived there for about 8 years in total. I've been in New York City for about 20 years and lived in Central Otago, North Canterbury, Christchurch as well, sort of South Island. And I've spent a little bit of time in Auckland.
And you're based in New York to this day? You're there now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I'm living, yeah.
And you involved in music over there? I remember, was it the Mad Season?
Mads.
The Mad Scene.
It's always a mad season, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's the mad scene, and I play in that band with Lisa, my partner, and we sort of play about once a month.
Mm-hmm.
Done a lot of other things too, music-wise. I've got a project with a guy, Theo Angel, called Cloudcraft. That's sort of like psychedelic freak folk, for want of a better word.
Nice.
And we've got one album that Mike McGonigal put out on his label, Yeti. Yeah.
We'll have to track that down. I reckon
Yeah.
that sounds good.
Don't have any
Absolutely.
copies with me.
That's all right. Do you find it strange that a band that you formed with your brother in 1978, or whenever it was, that broke up in the early 80s, which has staged various reformations over the years, and always made a good record, by the way, when that's happened, which is always a nice thing to see when bands get back together. You have this legendary status. Is that strange to you?
Well, strange in what way? How would you? What
Well,
do you mean?
that's something that, as sort of knockabout as you decided to put a band together as teenagers, becomes this sort of luminary thing that is.
Yeah.
It's almost like one of the great flag-waving New Zealand bands of history, really.
Yeah.
It's just a band with you and your brother. You knock around, make a record, and suddenly 30 years later, you're at Golden Plains and you have all this critical acclaim.
Yeah.
It's-
I guess it's not so strange when you realise how obsessive we were as kids, and also that we just sort of, we're music nuts. So I guess it kind of follows that we'd sort of still be doing something at this
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you collaborate with any other bands? I guess you've played with Pavement a couple of times, and they definitely cite you as a great influence. So I guess it's not really a collaboration. But what's your relationship with them like?
It's pretty good. with, like Scott was at the gig, last night, and he made a request, and he was dancing like a maniac down the side of the stage, and that made me pretty happy,
For sure.
Yeah, but they were an interesting band. I turned up in New York. I'd been back in New Zealand when they first started, and they just sort of caught, at a certain point, they caught a zeitgeist or something. They sort of put it into perspective in New York, and they were pretty cool, when they first started out, I really resonated with me what they were doing.
Some of their first Reformation shows were actually here. I think they played
Right.
one or two shows before they came to Australia and did Golden Plains last year.
Mm-hmm.
It was great to hear them. Scott, Spiral Stairs covered Anything Could Happen, didn't he?
I'm not sure about that. Did he?
He did.
Yeah.
I played it last week on the radio.
Oh, really?
You haven't heard it? It's
No.
great. It's really good. I think it's a B-side.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's good fun. It just sounds like it's just been sort of worked up live in the studio or something. You
Right.
should track that down.
Yeah, I should.
Pretty good.
I will.
Hey, Flying Nun Records also has quite a reputation now and has for a while. How did you, The Clean, and Flying Nun Records, how did that start? How did that relationship begin?
Well, Roger Shepherd, we'd met him probably in 78. I could tell a good story about him, he was sort of part of a group of sort of Christchurch art punks, all dressed in black and had groovy apartments or flats. There was a gig, I think the first night we played in Christchurch, and Roger rode back to his house on the front of a car, just sitting on like a station wagon, like sitting on the front, and we were amazed that he got all the way from a venue back to a house, and we also wondered about his sanity at that time. But later, The Clean had sort of started doing a bit of touring, and we'd gone from Christchurch up to Auckland, and he turned up and offered us a deal. And we'd also been offered a single deal with a Auckland label, but we sort of figured we would stick with the South Island thing and, do something with Roger. And it just evolved from that, just sort of him putting forward the idea. And
Yeah, and really, they released most of your albums, didn't they?
yeah, all our stuff, early stuff.
Yeah.
Tally Ho was his second single on the label. wasn't
Yeah,
it?
two singles came out at the same time, Pinning
Yeah.
Group and Tally Ho. It was '02, but they sort of arrived at the same time.
So Flying Nun is now partially owned by Neil Finn, is that right?
Yeah, he's one of the backers that
Right.
Roger's got involved.
So we've seen this sort of wave of bands from the golden age of Flying Nun suddenly reappearing in Australia. The Verlaines were here a couple of weeks ago. The Bats, of course, Robert Scott's other band, were here less than a year ago. I saw them; they're great. Headless Chickens rolled through about a year and a half ago. The Chills were here about a year ago. It seems to be suddenly, after all these years of battling in Australia, Flying Nun's time and to actually sell out shows and sell some records over here is finally here, which seems kind of odd to me after all these years, but
Yeah,
good to see it.
yeah, that's cool. People are still doing stuff. So,
Yeah. So who's on the label now that might interest you?
I think Die 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 are on the label. I saw them in Wellington just recently. I'd seen them before in New York, and they were good. But they've really developed into a good band. Doing interesting stuff.
I've seen them a couple of times. They're a great band.
Yeah.
Speaking of record labels, though, your last album that you released, Mr. Pop, was released on Arch Hill.
Yeah, with Ben. He's done a couple of records with us. We did a live record in New Zealand too, and he's a really great guy. He sort of toured us through New Zealand. We did a really good tour. I think we're going to release our next recording with him just out of allegiance to the work he's done. Even though Roger sort of popped back up with Flying Nun.
How did you come to them in the first place?
To Arch Hill.
Yeah.
I think it's through David actually. He did some touring with them and some stuff with them.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a new Clean record.
Yeah, we've sort of got the basics of it sort of roughed out in Dunedin. Yeah.
So is there a special chemistry that you still have with the Clean that you maybe don't feel with other things you do?
I think the Clean are sort of like a creative nucleus, but it does other things that I do have equal, import or whatever. They're just as interesting, but there is a kind of, pretty cool dynamic between the three of us, and it evolves in sort of interesting ways.
You find, because you do have these quite well quite well sort of broken up periods of time where, you know, you're in New York and there's not the opportunity to record, there's no touring, and then you come back with a record every few years. It seems to me that each of those records have a very different character. I mean, Unknown Country here has a character all its own. Mr. Pop again has a character all of its own. It seems such a lovely thing about your music that it's not predictable, but it's always the clean, you know. So can you give us any kind of insight into where this next one's going?
It's a bit of a move to another direction, you know. It's I can't really define it.
No.
But you know, the group's I guess a model for us has always been the Stones and the Beatles and the transitions they made in the 60s, you know. Like, I think what happened in the 80s is that bands tended to they would form a genre, like a sort of thing that was identifiable to them.
They'd establish a brand.
Yeah, and then it would just sort of continue on with variations of that. But yeah, the 60s dynamic was like you did something and then suddenly there was a, you know, transformation or a movement or something within the music, you know. And each album would be different. I always thought that's a good model for music making, you know, sort of push yourself a bit.
And singles and albums were much more distinct back then too.
Yeah.
You know, singles wouldn't always be on albums for a long time.
No.
And it's funny that with iTunes and the way the internet's working, we're becoming again more of a kind of singles-oriented music culture, I reckon.
That's cool.
Which is yeah, it has its own merits.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I think it's interesting when things are condensed into, you know, a short thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has your songwriting changed over the years with each new album?
God, I guess so. Yeah.
In what way?
I don't know. You sort of, you know, you turn the whole thing inside out. There's no rhyme or recipe to it. But you know, things occur. I'm really interested in things, improvisational sort of aspects of making music and applying that to structure and form and the way those two butt up against each other and you know, the battle between them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Hamish Kilgore from The Clean, thank you so much for chatting to us here at Triple R live from Golden Plains.